I was told to sit down because of the camera, by the way, just in case. Can you all see me, yeah? I wish we had a microphone, I have to speak loudly. Thank you so much for coming here. This is my second city. I actually chose Manchester to come to university back in 2009. Although it wasn't for academic reasons, it was just to be close to Old Trafford, to go to the stadium every 3 years. So this, oh dear God, what a bad idea.
You got upset half the audience.
See, this is exactly why politicians like Starmer always sit on the fence. You always attack them, you always criticize them, why are you on the fence? That's exactly why. Anyway, there's been a couple of very important things been happening yesterday and today, but a lot of people out there haven't heard about them. Including yesterday, the UK borders are still under threat. We had the UK-France summit. So obviously a lot of you, because you're following everything properly, you guys are smart ones, you know. But a lot of people out there haven't heard of it. Today, the US banking system is about to collapse, which is threatening the whole of the financial world order. But what are the mainstream media doing? They are standing outside Gary Lineker's house to see if he's left the house yet or not. Yeah. It's brilliant. I mean, it is absolutely fascinating what's going on, the disconnect between the media and the people. That's why, obviously, we have a lot of people like Nick and everyone who are still sacrificing their own lives by being in politics. But my fight, personally, is no longer about politics or party politics. It's about the new battleground, which is access to information and truth. And my truth. But it's about the media. It's all about the media these days. And by media, we're not talking about the lamestream media, because TV is dead, because we are the media. All of us, anyone who has an iPhone or any other phone, and you see something happening, it's not just about journalism or reporting, it's also about perspective. So we are fighting back, and the idea is, if we win the battle of ideas and arguments, then we're going to have to use our new slaves, the new politicos who are going to actually go and sacrifice their lives to do politics. I'm not going to do that. We're going to have to use those who actually want to do it for public duty and public service. The reality is, all of us, the political right, left, up, down, over the last couple of decades, few decades, the way we talk about the political establishment and politicians, it's also their fault. But when we say that they're out of touch, and when we say that they're not really kind of connected, or even on a more positive note, we say, I don't want to do it because it's a thankless job. That language has actually become a problem now. Because it is a thankless job. It's supposed to be a sacrifice. But the same way that we always talk about armed forces, for example. So the good people, we want the good people to get into politics. But the more we tell them, in front of them, that it's a thankless job, it's kind of off-putting. What we have to say is a thankless job in a good way. The way we say about the armed forces, that you have to sacrifice your life. You're not going to basically do it for glamour or privilege. But if we encourage that, if you say that, because that's the truth, but if you use that as a positive thing, we could get a few good people to go in there. Because all the good talent and everybody else, they're not really bothering. And some of them who are, they can't, including myself, can't really fit into the main parties. And it's quite tricky. There's still a few left who are still quiet conservatives in the Tory party that are still just somehow staying around, which is good. And some who are basically joining Reform UK and some other parties and everything else, and some just independent. That kind of inconsistency is a bit of a problem, because when we talk about the elites or the establishment, which kind of basically exist, but the modern elites or establishment are now made up by the so-called plebs and commoners of the day back in the day. They're all our people. They just got richer, and they got to the position of power. It's not like the same thing as about 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when the elite and establishment, when we used to call them, they were generally actually the elite. They were born into families of barons and lords and the royal families and all that. So technically, they are like us, all of them, from prime ministers to CEOs to the presidents of these unelected bodies like WHO and the EU. But they are still disconnected. So on the one hand, we have to treat them like us. And that's exactly why we and everybody else is so insulting towards them. And only when we get angry, we say and we attack them, Matt Hancock and everybody else. It's because we know subconsciously that they're not really the elite. That they don't deserve to be the elite, because they're one of us. And I think that's been a problem, because while we know that, we still treat them as the elite. That they are the powerful, we are the powerless. If we tell ourselves that we're not really powerless, we do have people power, we have to exercise it, and we have to use it in the common sense way, rather than the Jeremy Corbyn way. When the Corbynists and the Marxists say people power, they're talking about getting out there, burn cars like the French every Tuesday on the streets, for no reason. The French just burn cars every Tuesday anyway. Anything that happens, like Macron wears a wrong tie, let's burn the cars. That's what they do. We don't do that here. We don't do revolutions, we do evolutions. We also don't do devolutions, that's a bad idea. I don't want to talk too much of it, so I want to get mostly kind of questions, but the theme of at least this hour, I want to mostly focus on the whole people power thing, or lack of it these days, and the fact that I'm using new media as a new platform to start from here. Back in the day, Mahyar Tousi would have started either a political party or some sort of campaign cause sort of thing, and it's still needed, people are doing it, but I think it's better to win the arguments first. Not just win the battle of ideas, but also attract younger people and also the older people who haven't really been interested in politics. If they accidentally find my videos on YouTube, and if I could re-brainwash them, it's called re-education, it will help, because they've already been brainwashed by the whole of the institutions that we have. And this is why we've kind of fell behind, because this plan, when people say, and some people go too far, to make it more black and white, and they're called tinfoil hats. But even, let's just say they're moderate tinfoil hats, so they're not really crazy. We simplify the language when they say, this has been a plot since the 1950s and 60s. So technically, the line is true, but I'm not going to go without any evidence that it was a plot in a sense that there were 5 people, like lizards from Mars, had a meeting. It was a very subconscious wave of evolution in terms of the Western world and culture. Since the 50s and 60s onwards, there's been a wave of infiltration of certain mentality and worldview, whatever you're going to call it, the cultural Marxism or the statist control freak authoritarians, whatever it is. They got into the financial system, academics, the cultural arts, Hollywood. Hollywood in the 20s and 30s was a very different Hollywood. And I'm not actually completely defending that, because that was a bit more oppressive and backwards. They were quite a bit racisty. But in reality, they did overcorrection. Everything was about overcorrection. Since initially the First World War was like tiny bit overcorrection, especially for those of you, if you remember watching Downton Abbey, they actually kind of portrayed it the perfect way. Since the First World War, things changed. There was a bit more demand from certain people, and it was the pre-first wave of feminism as well. So some movements were good, some a bit more overcorrection. Second World War onwards, everything was about overcorrection, and ironically, we defeated authoritarians, but then we created the world order, which was based on order, with the illusion of freedom and democracy, but it was working. Whatever we say, 20th century was working to an extent. There were a lot of issues, but it was working, but now we can see it was a bubble. It was a big, long-term bubble, whether it was the financial system or the democratic systems, and we have to fix it now or prevent an actual burst, because you could either have, if the whole thing collapses, I'm not going to exaggerate to say in terms of like uprising or revolution, I'm talking about the integrity of it, everything that we have. If it collapses, you're going to have either the far left taking over, or what society calls a very extreme far right. This shouldn't really be called far right, but it's also an authoritarian mentality. And that is a problem as well. We have to, whatever party we're supporting, Reform or Tory or nothing, we all have something in common. We just want common sense, and we just want to make sure we're not fighting back against the establishment for the sake of it. Again, we're not the French, but we're doing it because we want to actually help all of us. We want to make sure that the country is for all of us. And the fact that we're not even allowed to talk about us first, it's weird because of the political party. If I say this, it's going to be mistaken. But we have to put Britain first. Britain first. When Trump said America first, it was generally accepted, apart from CNN and CNBC. We have to put Britain first. Nothing racist about us. We have to protect the British culture and the Anglo-Saxon identity, that the people have the creation of everything. Ironically, as Douglas Murray would say, this country is not an immigrant country, but by nature, from scratch, from day one, before William the Conqueror, it was already a mixed country. You had literally Anglo-Saxons. So it was not necessarily a nation of migrants, it was a nation of mixed, random people. So technically, it wasn't really any kind of indigenous type from the beginning, but it was created. It was an entity, identity, and a culture was created, a common culture. And that was around what we now have been calling Britishness. Or if you're more into, obviously, the English identity, it doesn't really matter, it's the same thing. But obviously not just because of mass migration, but overall in terms of the culture that changed, going back to what I said, 50s and 60s onward, in universities, schools, TV, entertainment, even the so-called white English Brits, kids who grew up. So now we would call them the younger generation X, so like my parents' generation, or the old millennials, us. Even if you were born here, white English Brits, you are now basically not one of us because you've been brainwashed, a lot of them. You're as foreign as a random Muslim Pakistani who can't integrate. And that's a really weird thing to say because the system hasn't really worked for a lot of people. There's this disconnect between the cities or certain areas in like Camden or Hackney or Islington to a very general, like medium-sized or big-sized town in Lincolnshire. It's huge. It's a whole different world. And that's bad. And that's the biggest problem. Anyway, I've been ranting too much. Let's go to questions.
Hands up if you want to ask any questions. This gentleman here.
I've got several.
Yeah.
5 minutes of questions.
And when you ask questions, if you could speak loudly.
Yep.
Nick, a couple of months ago, you did a segment on the motor seaters with Carl Benjamin.
Yep.
And you spoke about homelessness. I've got some for Mahyar as well. You spoke about homelessness, and basically the upshot of it was do nothing. Could the same tactics be used for foreign aid? So your point was generally don't give them money because they use it for drugs, don't give them food because they'll stay on the streets, as opposed to going into the shelters. Bearing in mind that foreign countries tend to get more and more in need of poverty, more and more in need of aid, and more in poverty as it goes along, should we stop foreign aid?
First thing is read my second book, which is called The Making of a Beggar, goes into this. So just one slight correction there, it's not doing nothing about homelessness, it's about rough sleeping and begging. So, and we class all these things together. So going back to the foreign aid doesn't work, in my point of view. What we need to do is we need to trade with these countries. If any money is to be spent, it should be trading with them so they can build themselves up, they get opportunities. Treating them as beggars just creates a beggar mentality, which then keeps them begging from the West, which destroys their soul and destroys their country, destroys their economy. We need to start looking at countries and going, you produce cocoa, we're going to start buying our chocolate from you, and why don't you process that chocolate? And if you process chocolate in Africa and send it to the EU, there's something like a 30-40% tariff goes on their chocolate, so it's unaffordable. Remove that tariff, trade with them fairly, those countries will start developing themselves. Because who are we to tell those countries what they should do? They need to work it out themselves and do what their people want them to do. We can help them by trading with them fairly. Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's spot on. And to say differently at the same time, both when it comes to rough sleeping and foreign aid, similar but obviously different levels. The people who claim to care about that, so the people who implement foreign aid, so people in power, and those in terms of the so-called humanitarian charity groups that do both. They say, let's give a couple of quids to the homeless person, or they do a tweet or a press release, we should do something about rough sleepers, and they say we should just send money to all these countries. They are the ones who don't care. They are the ones who are actually hurting both groups. And that's the reality. Obviously, that's the solution when it comes to the foreign countries. Well, not necessarily just trade, but the overall, it goes back to the long conversation, which I'll get back to in later. We become so flatlined, and in terms of the West, we call our countries developed. We gave up. Mid-20th century, we gave up. We developed now. We should still be developing. Why are we giving up? We're not doing anything anymore. So when we get like 0.3% growth, we got growth, well done. So if the so-called Western world order, the current world, not what the nutters want to do, if it continues to become prosperous, obviously trade will happen, if you allow it, with Africa and Asia, and that will actually drag everybody else up anyway. as long as they have a good system in their countries. Firstly, most of it is not even our fault. You could give all the free money to India and all the other countries, but if they have a messed up leadership, then the money is not going to get anywhere. So, well, we can't. What are we going to do? Are we going to go full on neocon and go and like liberate all these countries? You could choose. You could either pick that side, go to Africa again, like basically turn them into democracies. Good luck with that. Or just sit there and be like, well, you can see now the best case studies in the Western world, where generally speaking, democracies work. Do that, and if you want to get prosperous, then we'll trade with you. Done. Same with rough sleeping, because it's about, you're right, it's about different categories. You've got actual poverty, you've got homelessness, which includes people who are on the waiting list, and you've got rough sleeping. And one of the things I was passionate about, got involved when I was still especially doing politics, was the charity called Crisis, which is about obviously the homelessness and everything else like that. And I went to so-called soup kitchens, and I've had conversations with a lot of homeless people in London. And that's the thing. And this was, again, a few years ago, about 10 years ago, which you still had more, mostly homeless people being white Brits. And nowadays you have a lot of illegal migrants who, again, that's a whole different problem, because not only they don't have a national insurance number, they don't even have basic documents, so you can't even legally help, because they shouldn't really be there anymore. That's a whole different, unfortunate category. But you do have, and everyone generalizes the alcoholics and drugs, but it's not really just because of that. It's the deep mental health issues that on the surface, when I was having a conversation with a couple of them, and they were there, they were getting the food, and I said, okay, that corner we got like a job center sort of thing, and then this, if we help you. And they actually said, no thank you, I don't believe in materials in life, I don't believe in having a job or a house or a car. Obviously no one believes that, but of course, because the trauma and mental health issues and depression, and the problem is, the state, even at best, local councils and central government, they would go to them, because everything's bureaucratic, like tick box exercise sort of thing. They would just ask them, do you want help? No, thank you. Okay, cool, next. There's no personalized service. So there's no one to actually sit there, be like, okay, do you really mean you don't want help? Wow. Let's do dig deep. Wow. As I say, so everything's about faceless bureaucracy. So they say, yeah, we got a solution, we got shelters. But what are you going to do with that? It's not just about shelters. Everyone can try shelter. It's about what's next. Anyway, I've been ranting. Go.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's all about, all we do now is we throw money at problems. If money was going to solve problems, we'd have no problems in this country.
Exactly.
It takes more than money. Gentlemen, I had a question.
Next beer.
Why do you think the US banking system will fail? And if I can be really cheeky, a second question. At what point should oil stop being priced in dollars and sort of move on to some new currency?
Oh, this is my thing. So, I don't think it will fail, but it will fail the way it's supposed to be failing. So again, this is technically a theory, but it's been proven when it comes to the trend of ever since we got rid of gold and the fiat currency, which obviously initially when I got involved with this whole thing, this whole world, I was more Puritan pro-gold against fiat currency. I still am, but I'm more critical of fiat currency, but I get the principle of fiat currency. Firstly, the whole thing was created for two reasons. One was the Western world, when they were still towards the end of developing, just before they became developed, that getting rid of gold, which was, because it was limited, it gave the ability to these countries to do unlimited money, so accelerate growth, so yay. But it also became unsustainable, so then they created a system of fiat currency which is controlled chaos. So it does collapse every 10 years or so. It does go through chaos, but it's controlled, and because the financial world order, especially since Second World War, we're all in it together, if one goes down, the others will go down with it. And you think it's a bad thing, and of course morally it's a bad thing, but it works because it does prevent world conflicts. So literally, if America and Canada would go down, then France and Britain will go down at the same time. Imagine if you didn't have that, then America and Canada would go down, and even us, and then France and Germany are still up. Yeah, it would be a little bit of a problem, including how, considering how Germany and France, the way they are in the European Union. You give them more power? Oh, that's not a good idea. So it's one of those, it's a big dilemma with the current system. And yes, the US banking system, I think it will be prevented to an extent. Politically, it will seem as a collapse. So Biden is completely going to be dead. And whether it's going to be Trump or DeSantis,
He's not right.
it's going to keeping up. So it's great for the Republicans what's going to happen, but it's not really a collapse. Obviously, anything could happen, but the way it seems like they are going to have to basically the Federal Reserve increase the interest rates. Politically, they have to say they don't have to give a timeline. They have to make it seem like it's long-term or permanent. But all they have to do is just raise it for about 6-9 months, and then inflation will get fixed again. And that's the problem, by the way. This solution, which is the right solution, is immoral. It's not right. It's not sustainable. But the system is based to not be sustainable, to kind of keep going and going and going. Which again, that's why we can't really go back to gold standards as much as I want to. But I think at some point there will be an actual collapse, which will be the actual our world order and the other side, which is still technically West and East. And we had some really, really scary news, which was again not reported by the mainstream media yesterday. Saudi Arabia and Iran are friends again. And who did that? China. Saudi and Iran have been, obviously since the 1979 regime change in Iran, have been enemies. I mean, they were always enemies because Arabs and Persians. But this was, again, because, and it was maintained, the West have been supporting essentially the Iranian regime only because they are now allies with Saudi in terms of the oil stuff and controlling the regime, the region. But also it's easier, they prefer to have a weaker enemy in Iran, the Islamic Republic, rather than a strong, independent, equal partner, what they had towards the end of Shah, or what's going to happen next. So what happened this week, which again China basically brought Iran and Saudi together, might seem like a shock, and of course it is, but it makes sense. This is basically Saudi trying to keep the Iranian regime that they hate in power, because they're scared of what could come next for them. And the West are turning a blind eye. Same reason that, especially Biden, let alone our people here, they haven't really been supporting the Iranian revolution that's going on right now, the uprising. You know, they every now and then they have to do a press release. Yes, women in Iran, blah, blah, blah. They don't really do anything about it. It's only because, firstly, it's very awkward for them. They've been doing a lot of interventions in the 20th century, it didn't work. That's just bad PR. Secondly, it's going to be a very awkward conversation with Saudi Arabia if the Iranian revolution happens. And hey, Iran and the West are now friends again, and Israel. Then they're going to have to call Saudi, hello, old mate. We're now friends with your enemy. All these agreements we had, all the free cash that you gave to our Prince Charles at the time. Yeah, forget about all that. I'm washing my hair now. We're not going to be friends. It's very embarrassing. So now, this new agreement is dangerous for all of us, and people in Iran and the Middle East and in Israel. But it's also made things more comfortable for Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden. They can sit back and be like, oh, thank God, they're friends. So they're going to make things, the West is going to basically allow more tyranny to happen in Saudi and Iran, just to keep conflict to not happen externally for them. They don't want things to be uncomfortable for themselves. They don't want to have pressure in Pentagon or in London. Are you going to do something about the Middle East? They don't want to do anything anymore. They just want basically, this is a new version of having puppets. They're not really puppets, but it's a new version of having puppets. Just basically having someone that's not going to disturb you, even though they're killing their people, and they will be killing your people. They're going to be coming here on small boats. You've had literally Iranian regime spies, and they use Hamas and Hezbollah and all the other nutters. They come here. I'm a refugee. Bomb. Everything explodes. But apparently it's racist to say that. Anyway.
Next question.
Yeah, I'm Simon. By the way, when you first started your blog, I thought your name was actually Mahyar Tousi and Louis.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I've heard that.
That's what you were saying. As part of the Britain First agenda, do you think we should be trying to bring back our manufacturing from China, obviously because of Taiwan as well? And secondly, do you think we should be including fracking as part of our agenda for energy independence?
Yeah, in terms of the latter, definitely. And it's a lot more easier, more comfortable to say that now that technology and science have actually we now have enough evidence that if you do it in a certain way, it will be safer and it will be cheaper. You don't have to do it the way we did 5-10 years ago. So definitely. But the first one, which is linked to it, manufacturing, yes, but we shouldn't really see it like that, because that still gives the perception to both left and right and up and down that it sounds like we're just going back to manufacturing for the sake of nostalgia or easy option that it was working, was building. We have to go back to it. We have to bring it while we're doing everything else that we're doing at the same time. So we are a service economy now, and that's just the inevitable outcome of developed world when you're no longer building because everything happens, but safety net goes up, minimum wage goes up, workers' rights, so it'll be harder to have manufacturing, it'll be more expensive, so obviously these countries will end up finding new things. Everyone talks about the services industry, which is obviously the main thing here, but we do build, it's a very specific niche thing that we have left, and that was maintained for obvious geopolitical reasons. We have one main manufacturing industry, guns and tanks and stuff like that. So we have that. We didn't really give that away. Thank God for that, by the way. Imagine if you get China, can you build some tanks so we could use against you? That would be lovely. But yes, definitely, we do have to go back to it. But we shouldn't be some sort of campaign or even a political party or government selling it as we are becoming a nation of manufacturers again. It's not like that. It should just happen. Just bring it back anyway. Just allow, by having, not necessarily destroy all regulations, but destroy all the red tape, idiotic bureaucracy to allow enterprise to happen, to allow smaller businesses, smaller factories to happen. You don't have to have mass corporation in like steel to happen. You can just allow it, like we always talk about fracking and nuclear. You don't have to have expensive, big, massive, expensive nuclear plants that China had to build for us. Just build smaller, more affordable, quicker plants. So you were saying?
I just wanted to say on the fracking front, I would only advocate it where the local people actually directly benefited.
Yes.
The money doesn't go to the council because they'll just waste it. It goes directly to the local population and they get free energy or something.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually added that because you said it a better way than even the Tories would say. The Tories would say local consent. It's not necessarily about the consent of it. Of course, you need the consent. It's the benefits of it.
Yeah.
With fracking, with the manufacturers I was saying, like local, smaller manufacturers and everything. It should basically the benefits, whatever you want to use the word benefit as. So in terms of the financial incentives or job opportunities, the power should go to the individual citizens of the country and those areas. Don't use the local authorities or national government as the representatives of the people. So you give the money and everything else, all the power to the local council because they say, well, these are the representatives. No, because it just gets lost. And the whole thing, and then it gives an illusion of freedom and democracy. Same thing with overall national democracy. There are some people on both certain right and left who are using the word democracy and they're utilizing it. Like some of them know exactly what they're doing, that's the Corbynist types, and some of them just, in a naive way, they think they're saying it to give power to the people. It depends how you enhance democracy. If you're just campaigning for the sake of giving more voting rights and voting kind of powers and different like national referendums on everything, it sounds like, oh, you're giving more power to the people. But no, people are being used, via them, you're actually giving more power to the state and the establishment. Because the establishment could basically just say, well, we gave the illusion of everyone voted on this, even though it wasn't really a proper mandate. So we now have a proper mandate and consent on to do whatever we want. This perfect example is, it wasn't really people voting, but it was Parliament. When Parliament voted for the lockdown measures or emergency powers, it was a very vague legislation, and they just allowed the central government to just do whatever they want. Like, well, Parliament voted, but they didn't really say how much power you're going to have, and that was the biggest problem. So if we have to enhance democracy, we have to give more, even like local referendums on certain things, but the result of all that shouldn't give more power to whether the local council or the national governments. The result of everything, every decision should go back, the benefit should go back to the people and the area, not the councillors.
So how do you do that financially? Or?
Well, no, I mean, it's not necessarily just financially, it depends what the decision is, for example. In regards to, if there's a decision, for example, to build, I don't know, frackings or like, anything, like shops, whatever. And if the people in a certain area, basically, are saying yes, the default position is you give that paper to the local authorities and the bureaucrats saying people want this, and then they decide how much and how many and where. Whereas in reality, all you have to do is just what we call Old English liberalism or classical liberalism in this country, which actually created this back in the 18th, 19th century, you get that piece of paper that people said yes, you actually just say, people of this area, you now are allowed and free to do this and that, and now you decide. In your own areas, in your own corners, you decide you're going to build this, you're going to do that. Obviously, there's going to be basic supervision and there's health and safety regulations, but you're not going to actually give that power to the politicians or the elite to decide, to save you from yourself, and that's the problem. I mean, I'm making it vague, obviously, but it applies to every certain area.
The ULEZ in London is
Oh, yeah.
going through at the moment in Sadiq Khan.
Yeah.
So I appreciate what you're saying regarding local councillors.
Sure.
But when our local councillors
Yeah.
go against our referendums,
Yes.
and we can't get rid of those local councillors
Yeah.
because of voting demographics, what are we left with then?
But that also applies to MPs as well. Technically, that's on us, the plebs, the voters. But again, how do we actually fix it? When you have MPs or local councillors who are either out of touch or basically going against what the silent majority want, because there's a loud minority that decides that they're elected or they push for certain things, it's technically our responsibility, I mean, all of us, the voters in each area or the voters in the country, to have better people to actually stand, but also the better people to actually vote and vote against those things. But again, how do you do it? Are you going to play God? But again, that's going to be more dictatorial. It's a very difficult kind of answer. We know what the solution is. People need to be more engaged, and good people need to be more engaged against the loud minority. But because we can't really explain how to do it, unless it was a video game we could actually just move people around, then even one might think that the solution should be just change the mechanism of the system. Which I appreciate that it could be a good short-term solution. The only solution that could actually work is reduce the powers of politicians on all levels. So when we say localism, when we say decentralization or local devolution, it always goes back to giving more powers to even the local politicians. And we still need councillors, you know, they still need to be the basic mechanism, definitely. But when we say decentralizing and localism, that should mean the people, the actual people, the communities and the community groups and all that, rather than even a councillor, because it's not a councillor. It's think you're giving power to the councillor, like the MP, but there's people behind them. They're called faceless bureaucrats of the local councils or in Parliament or Whitehall. So it's just smokes and mirrors, the elected officials that we have. So you're going to have basically breaking down the system and reduce the powers of anybody we elect. So that way, it doesn't really matter who votes for who. It doesn't really matter if it's going to be a Labour or a Tory. They're not going to have enough powers to do anything. The best times is when the US government, the federal government goes into shutdown. And it's like complete, that's the best time in America, because politicians are not doing anything. And everyone's happy. Anyways.
This gentleman here, and then I'll come to you.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. You made some really good points at the beginning about sacrifice, which you just expanded on as well. You said that we need more people to go into politics, to put their body on the line,
but not me.
The military.
Anybody but me.
But you wouldn't do it yourself.
Yes.
And, I'm wondering what kind of people do you recommend should do that? Because the way I see it, people like you, who've got 270,000 subscribers on YouTube, that's over 250,000 people, big account on Twitter as well. You've got a huge following. Like you've said, we've won most of the big arguments. Everyone in this room knows it. We've won the argument on COVID, where it came from, that the vaccines don't work. We all understand that now.
We're winning on ULEZ.
ULEZ, people don't like that. Ukraine, nobody wants us to be involved in. And we can win all of these arguments, but like you said, nothing's going to change unless people get inside the ring, throw the hat in and go and change it.
Exactly.
I mean, what's stopping you? Because people like you, I'm going to name some other names as well. People like you, not too personal. But
No, of course,
But yeah,
I'm not crying.
you're sitting on a golden ticket, and I think you have to use it. Other people would include Majid Nawaz, Russell Brand. Corbyn's going to run again as an independent, I think. And other politicians like him, from right and left, should do the same. I think we should get out of every single mainstream party. Don't give them another penny of your money or another minute of your time come the next election. That includes reform with Shield Tice and his Shield girlfriend. And we need 650 independents to stand in every single constituency. We need to find the best person in every single one,
Right.
and then all coalesce behind that person. And I seriously think we could make a massive dent at the next election. But people like you have got a massive head start with those 270,000 followers. Yeah, just go for it, man.
I appreciate that. Actually, I will address the main part of the question, which is like basically people like me. When I say no, is not doing it is a public line where I have to basically say now for now. It's for now. It's because my role right now is bigger than that for now. It's about, I'm bringing a lot of you around today. You probably noticed the questions. You're not all the same. Some could be Tory, some could be Reform, some could be Independent, some could be this or that and up and down. This is the power. This is very important. I'm giving the common ground, a common goal to a lot of people who thought that they should be different. That's important now, but then things will change, even including what I will do in the future. And it will have to be when it's right and there is a right time, a right solution. If I just randomly stand either as a Tory candidate or a Reform or independent or just create my own party, just for the sake of it, no plan, for the sake of rebellions, it's not going to happen. Also, to be fair, I appreciate your point about independence and all that. There's a problem because the system, the way the House of Commons sits, that's going to cause a lot of chaos if you have 600 independent MPs, because that's actual tyranny. Because you have to have some sort of unifying cause with at least one group of them. Independents, you're going to have obviously some good independents that a lot of people would agree with, but you could also have nutters. You could have like far right, far left, far up, far down, far this, far NIMBY, far YIMBY, and then if they can't even create a caucus, let's just call it, if we're not going to call party, caucus or group, who's going to become Prime Minister? Who's going to become Minister? Who's going to become Cabinet? But that's a whole deeper problem, because it's not really your problem, it's the system, it's the way House of Commons sits. If we had some sort of chamber that could be built based on just independent representatives, and there are local councils, a couple of them in the country, small councils like parishy level councils that just do independent councillors.
I love that.
Yes, that's perfect. Yeah, and it works. And some would say, people like friends I have in Westminster, like the statists, like the elitists, they say, yeah, but that works because there's a smaller chamber. I get it. But size doesn't matter. As I was saying on my channel, size is not important. But it is actually, it goes back to, you can, but that's a very ambitious plan. I want the whole system to change. I want a British revolution, which is, again, the opposite of French revolution. We do British reform, British change. The system should change, but we can't just shout about it when we don't really have a full plan, like the actual concrete, like a business plan. But again, which goes back to what you said. Maybe even people like me and many others should even consider to actually sit down and have a meeting, at least have some sort of vision for the future. And Nick as well.
Yep, the lady in the middle.
We all know that the World Economic Forum have got a plan. Do you think there's any chance that they would fail because they're so powerful and so rich? And they've already got into all the local governments, like the local councillors, and they've paid them all off to release the 15-minute zones. So where do we have any power? Because they're millionaires, billionaires, so how can we do anything?
Yes, it's quite interesting. Not to undermine, like to be complacent or undermine the threats or like, don't worry about it, everything's fine. And they shouldn't really know that we're saying this, but they're already creating their own obstacle. So you said they're like very powerful, they have a plan. And I've been paying attention to them since 2012, 11, whether the conferences and the things that they say. There is a basic vision, and it's quite legitimate. It's not illegal. The basic vision of globalism, we disagree with them, and sometimes it could get to a level where it's like, oh, is it moral or not? But there's nothing wrong with being a globalist. It's a legitimate worldview. We just don't want it to happen at that level. But everything I've noticed about them, they're not as united as we think they are. They have all these meetings and all these ideas, all these papers, and they contradict each other. And it's quite fascinating. I'm not saying it because of that, everything's fine, don't do anything about it, they're going to die themselves. But we shouldn't really be that paranoid and treat them as they are so like God level and we're so powerless that we're just going to stay here and cry. So, and we shouldn't just like wait for them to fail. We have to have solutions and alternatives in the meantime. So the 50-minute sit-ins, these things, what they do, the way they, when we say they have a plan, or they like unite all this, it's a classic Western world order thing that actually created all this. It's all very subconscious, it's all very hardwired. Everything about the Western democracies or the capitalist system, free market and everything else, it's not dictatorial based on a figure, it's dictatorial, it's based on control and order by an invisible figure, which is basically the people doing it to themselves. It's the people doing the tyranny, but they don't even know they're doing it. So the checks and balances that we always talk about, the US system or here, it's not one figure, but it's basically the same thing. But it's like invisible power. So in certain countries in the East, like in Iran or China, if there's a group of people who want to control the country or do something, they're going to have to become dictators. They're going to have to put a gun to people's heads. But here, we prevented that, but we're still basically controlling people. It is still authoritarianism, but it's invisible. So you think you're free. You think you have the kind of the free will and all this. But we still have to do more than the basic dictatorships. But with that, I'll go back to actually your question in a second. On that, they're not gonna, there's no way that entity, for example, is gonna be some sort of completely powerful, united, every policy that they want. There's no such thing, because they will also have other policies that comes from Davos that literally goes against 50-minute cities. And it's just absolutely hilarious, by the way.
It's against the law for the freedom of movement.
Yeah, and
it's against the law. They're not allowed to do it, so they're talking. It's just media spin all the time.
Yeah,
it's so frustrating listening to their nonsense.
Exactly.
And they think that they can pull that off. People will rebel.
I mean, you're right, and it's already happening. And they do test the waters. Even things like ULEZ, everything like in the low traffic neighborhoods. I'm not necessarily saying that it was a one person in Davos that decided, let's do this in the local councils in London, in England. It's a whole division that they have that's been also trying to be spread as a propaganda campaign in other countries like France. But they test them. Some of them work, some of them go through, and some of them there's a backlash. And they're smart enough not to push too hard yet. They know that when they have to like back away for a bit. So with the ULEZ stuff, in London it will be defeated, but then they're still going to push it in Bristol and other places. So it's going to be interesting. Sorry.
I'm Mahyar, my name's Alan. I'm only some years of life now. I have a son, who's 25. He's more articulate and quite bright. And when I talk to him about these questions, and he sort of shrugs his shoulders and walks off, and I say, son, this is your future, and this is your children's future. And I say, well, if he's taken that attitude, and how many more? And I talk to some of his friends, and they sort of have this sort of same attitude as him. I think, we're in real shit here.
Well, is it like, you're saying like people like him are complacent?
Yeah, unbelievably complacent.
That's how the system is built on, by the way. And it generally speaking, worked to an extent, or at least the illusion of it, last few decades, until now.
Can I just add to that? Just to the chap who was questioning about the 11 ULEZ in London.
Yeah.
We've just had some local elections. I'm quite vocal when I get going, to be honest. And we had some councillors come round, and I was giving them my opinions. They didn't like it. However, the next day I got a call from the Labour Party to my house asking me certain questions. I thought, never in my life has anyone asked me questions. I thought, I get paranoid now. Someone beginning to take notes because I'm quite vocal. I thought, oh right, that's a note. So that's why I'm here today. And I just thought, I'm quite astounded at it because I think I'm going mad myself. Millions of questions I want to ask, and I think I'm going mad inside. I want to look at these people around here and think, do you know what, I'm not on my own.
Because of that, I'm so tempted to somehow find his number from someone and call him tomorrow. And I'll address this and then
we'll have a break.
The complacency, it's kind of basically how the system is built on. When I was talking about like 2 minutes ago about the Eastern dictatorships or the third world dictatorships compared to our world order that we have currently, there are basic differences. But the overall thing is similar because it goes back to what Jordan Peterson always says, chaos versus order. And it's like how much order. So we have that ultra order, and it could get sometimes a level of authoritarianism and no real freedom. And the system used, it's not really a plot like one person deciding. few decades ago. It just happened. Of course, there were basic visionary people that decided to let's just have a system for the West, especially since the Second World War, but not in a James Bond villain sort of type. This system is built on creating prosperity enough and having basic democracy, a voting system, that by having people not becoming interested in politics, keeping their basically burying their head in the sand, that works. As I said, they thought that was working to an extent, but it's a bubble, and it's now people like slowly coming back up. Like, what is going on? So that system, that is even still young people are doing that, head buried in the sand. They kind of ignorance of bliss. That's the system. That's how it works. Because imagine if everyone had a say and everyone had shown their demands every single day. They are afraid of what used to happen in the past, the revolutions. So they've been preventing the revolutions in the West, including France, which is quite impressive because they had revolutions every 10 minutes, by having this system. But it's still not sustainable. They have to come up with, or we have to come up with the next level, a new version of it before it explodes. Because if it comes down, it's going to be bad for us and the idiots who are supporting it. That's the problem. That's a quick.
We're going to take a quick 10-minute break.
Yeah, I need a drink.